CIAC leans into. CIAC is also supporting another amazing organization that is working to level the literacy playing field in the Promise Zone. So, for context, for the audience that don't know what the Promise Zone is, these communities have high unemployment rate, high crime and mortality rates, significant numbers of vacant lots and abandoned buildings, and homelessness. The Promise Zone designation, which lasts 10 years, is a catalyst for ongoing collaboration and change that will drive the region's growth, create a better and more inclusive St. Louis region. So my question is, what is, there's like three questions in this one question. So what is Turn the Page STL? Why is it critical that they are approaching their work through a racial equity lens? You've mentioned racial equity lens like three different times already. I'd really like to know, like, why is it important for us to focus on these systemic issues through a racial equity lens? And how is UMSL supporting their efforts?
Sure. So, Turn the Page is like got a, for both of me and Kylie, Turn the Page has really got a special place in our hearts, and the work that we do with Lisa Greening, who has done an excellent job with making sure that this initiative launches. But Turn the Page is another partnership that we've been supporting through strategic planning. And we've done of course, some of their front end, some of their um, qualitative, data, research with listening sessions and focus groups. And I had a chance to, go into the communities and talk to parents, preschool parents and teachers in St. Louis Public School, and the reading specialists, and kind of get a better sense of their lived experience there. So we've utilized the research partly developed by our wonderful, excellent, and awesome director, Dr. Paul Evison, who, of course, is out on medical leave, focused on best practices for coalition and partnerships. A coalition of partnership is when a range of people come together to tackle a big, difficult problem. We have quite a few in St. Louis, in the St. Louis region. We know that no one organization or sector can drive community change alone. And Lisa has done a good job with bringing us in to help her on the front end as far as some of the qualitative going in, talking to just different community members, school districts there, other stakeholders, people who are interested in reading, right? People who understand literacy as well. I'm going to stop there just to kind of address the next question that you have, because it's going to kind of tie it together. So you ask, and I want to be clear that why is addressing systemic issues and looking through racial equity lens so important? The reason why that is so important is because people have naturally always wanted to help people to some extent. What we need to, when we're saying racial equity lens, is that some of the policies, or like you mentioned earlier, some of the rules or how we do things, right? We may not know how another group of people may receive that help or that information or their outlook. Looking through a racial equity lens is really just an inclusive perspective on the diversity, equity, inclusion, and conversation. It's saying we want to look through a racial equity lens by including all voices of all races to make sure that we are not missing anything. Because we know the golden rule is usually, treat people how you want to be treated. But what the rule should also be is treat people how they want to be treated
Mhm.
well. And so that racial equity lens portion is so important because um, you can't just throw a lot of interventions and help people without knowing how you need to help them. A lot of You've seen it before. Funders will, throw money to solve a problem, right? And you might put a band-aid on it, but you're not digging deep and you're not including the ones that you are helping in the conversation. So one of the things we do, just not with Lisa, but whatever we do, is we dig a little deeper and have those community listening sessions and talking to the people who matter, the people who are being affected, and also using their expertise and their lived experience and their the things that they do well to kind of help solve that problem. So with that, with that approach of coalitions and partnerships, it's critical that we approach it from that way because of the historic disinvestment as well and structural racism that have impacted children in the promise zone because of the long-standing inequities. Black and brown children are less likely to read proficiently at third grade than their white peers. That's data that's done, that things that we recognize. So the strategic planning process focus on understanding the root causes of these systemic problems to better level the playing field and reduce structural inequities, and also prioritize working for systems change on multiple levels. So these includes partnering with other regional leaders to ensure that children and families have access to high quality summer learning opportunities, that we understand ways to build trust with families who have been traumatized by the system themselves, and that we, as a region, better understand how racial equity and literacy is important to the future of our communities. So
Mm.
our key partner of that work is the College of Education, who just received a federal grant to lead professional development for teachers, supporting them in bringing culturally relevant teaching, digital literacy, and other key strategies to the St. Louis region with the focus on the schools in the Promise Zone, and just helping them also become more culturally competent on the communities that they're serving. And so all of this is just a great fit.
Yes, that sounds great. And so one thing that I've realized since I've been really engaged in trying to commence meaningful change is a lot of times when you talk about these deep system issues, people want to point to the person and not the process as an issue, right? We see this a lot with like addiction, right? A lot of times people will point to the person who has addictions, like, well, you're just doing X, Y, and Z instead of addressing the environment that is contributing to the addiction.
Exactly.
I think that's so important, and people, and honestly, I think it's something like it's definitely some type of like a psychological, like, okay, just I'm gonna quick, use my fast brain to just like say this is why they're in this situation. And I think when we were going through Ferguson, I heard that, and I experienced it, right? There was when I would talk to my white friends about what's going on, they would always say, well, if this wasn't then, not failing to step back and say, well, this is a systemic issue, and maybe they were just cutting through an apartment complex to get to the bus, but because of a certain type of bias, it has led to a certain situation that is at hand. Another thing I wanted to mention is I participated in social justice mediation training for students held by the UM system, and they really kind of like highlighted the importance of approaching processes through critical race theory lens, right? You need to approach these situations assuming race and all these types of disparities have already been at play before you even got there, right? So like when you approach it from a critical race theory lens, you can kind of understand the underlying causes to a fraction or a situation that you're trying to address. So I think the work that Turn the Page STL is doing, the importance of approaching it from a racial equity lens is just so critical. So thank you for sharing that information.
One thing that when as you're talking and as Brene was talking too, I think of the it's a little bit of a joke. It's three fish passing, older fish passing two younger fish in the water, and the older fish swims by, and they say, and he says to the younger fish or the two other fish, how's the water? And the two others look at each other and they're like, what's he talking about? What's the water? I mean, we're swimming in it, right? Like and so when you talk about individuals versus systemic, like sometimes it's easier to see like, oh, an individual rather than to understand all of the conditions and all of the ways that our systems work, our institutions work, our government works, all of the different factors that lead to, one individual's behavior, right? And the kind of story and the story and the story behind. like Bernea said, in the Turn the Page strategic planning, we go through a process of the 5 whys. It's not, doesn't have to be 5, but understanding like, why is this happening? Why is this happening? Why is this happening here? And starting to dig into the values, the cultural expectations, the mental models, the various different ways that that all the influences that come to bear onto a 3rd grade level reading. So I'll pause there, but appreciate being able to highlight their work.